community at large is this, roughly this, this number. And if you don't, the other important thing is if you don't know the information, don't make it up. Or don't try to overinflate, the numbers. Be accurate, be as accurate as possible. Say, well, if it's a range, for example, I really don't know how many Muslims are in the United States. Nobody has really given, but most people say the range is between 5 to 8 million. So that's what I say. It's between 5 to 8 million. I don't know, some people say it's 10 million. Pew said it's 2.5 million. Until we get some empirical data, until CAIR-MI actually does the count, I'm waiting. And we don't know, But you want to give a range. But the idea is not that you want to try to impress them to say, we're so big and so strong. The idea is really just to say, this is who we are, just to give a sense of who we are. Because you want to humanize the community, and you want to give the staffer or the elected official an idea of who we are, so that they can say, oh, okay. And if there's an issue that is affecting the Muslim community at large, generally speaking, you want to give the idea that this issue, let's say it's racial profiling, is something that's not only affecting, Horace, who's coming in as an individual, but it's affecting Horace and his community. So this is a community-wide issue. So that you give a sense that this is not just a one-person problem, but it's a problem that's affecting a lot of different people. So there is need for action, not only just for one person, but for a larger community as well. Brother, had a question from that?
Yes. Recently, you made a comment that George Bush is the first Muslim president. How can you justify, calling a recuperating drunkard a man who instigated 2 illegal wars, first Muslim president? I find him.
Sure. The brother's referring to an article I wrote for Foreign Policy magazine last month, and the title was America's First Muslim President. Here was the purpose, here was the idea behind it. At first I was just trying to be funny for one. Not that funny, but okay. That's what I'm not in comment. But the idea was simply this. Toni Morrison, if you remember in the 90s, said that Bill Clinton was the first black president. And her reasoning was that that was the first president that she was aware of who was very comfortable with black voters and with black society in general. That he didn't see the African American community as kind of another separate category of people, but he saw them as Americans. And he felt very comfortable going to black churches and going to black community events as a white president. And so she wrote that, or said that Bill Clinton was the first black president. So I said in a similar way, George W. Bush in 2000 was the first presidential candidate to feel comfortable with the Muslim American community. In 1999, when various organizations, Muslim organizations, AMA, the American Muslim Alliance, CAIR, MPAC, AMC, which doesn't exist anymore, American Muslim Council, W.D. Muhammad's community, they formed an umbrella organization called the AMPCC, Umbrella American Muslim Political Coordinating Committee. The idea was, in 1999, they said, we're coming on a presidential election, and we wanted, rather than Muslim groups kind of doing their own thing, we want them to offer one joint endorsement, one unified endorsement. And they determined what were the key issues that were important to the Muslim American community at large. So it was civil rights, it was justice in Israel-Palestine, it was healthcare, education. They had a whole list of issues that were important. And they said, okay, now we know what the important issues are to the community. We want to go to the candidates and talk to them, where do you fall on these issues? So they approached both George W. Bush, who was then governor of Texas, and Al Gore. And George W. Bush was very forward-leaning, met with Muslim leaders in Austin, Texas, in the governor's mansion, asked him what the concerns were. And if you remember, in the first presidential debate, the second presidential debate, when asked about the issue about racial profiling, the question was pertaining to racial profiling primarily regarding African Americans and Hispanics in traffic stops. George W. Bush said, I'm against that. I'm also against the use of secret evidence against Arabs and Muslims, because then President Clinton was holding 24 Muslims by the use of secret evidence, where they were arrested and detained without any charge or any ability to see the evidence that was being used to hold them. So that was something that really galvanized the Muslim community, as was articulated by the Imam before, to support George W. Bush. Now, what happened afterwards, after he gets elected, which happens with any elected official, we can talk about war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, the Patriot Act, and other types of things that were Muslims were negatively impacted by. We can definitely talk about that. But what I wanted to articulate in that article was that in the foreign policy piece was that we were seeing elected officials who are very much keeping Muslims at arm's length. And we saw that in 2008, right? That both candidates, Barack Obama and John McCain, nobody went to a mosque. Nobody went to an Islamic center. When Barack Obama was in Ohio, when Biden was in Ohio, the weekend of ISNA, we had 35,000 Muslims at ISNA, they refused to come to the convention. You know, Keith Ellison complained, you know, openly in the New York Times saying, I wanted to go to North Carolina to help with the black vote, and I was told to stay away. Jim Zogby, Arab American from Utica, New York, who's not even Muslim, he's Catholic, when he wanted to help with the Arab American vote in places like Iowa and Michigan, was told to stay away. So there was a concern that candidates, Republican and Democrat, were keeping Muslims away. Keeping Muslims away. We had the same problem with John Kerry in 2004. So the point of my article was that George W. Bush was comfortable. Policies, we can talk about that, but was comfortable with Muslims. Comfortable to be the only president to ever have gone to a mosque twice. And that's still the case. President Eisenhower laid the cornerstone for the mosque in Washington, in D.C., but before, when it was first being constructed, but when it was finished, he had left office. And no president had ever gone to a mosque until days after 9/11, when George W. went to the mosque to stand up against bigotry against Muslim American and any backlash. And then he went again before he left office. But since then, no president, in this case President Barack Obama, had ever gone to an Islamic center or a mosque. And I'm not saying that McCain would have either. My concern is that right now the community is being seen as something that a lot of politicians want our money, and they want our votes, but they don't necessarily want to be seen with us right now because of the political liabilities associated with being associated with the Muslim community. And that's why it's important that we stand up against that prejudice, but we also, again, really make our case heard so that people can feel comfortable to stand with us because we're Americans like everybody else.
Sorry, because there's so many questions, inshallah, afterwards.
Yeah, one question.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, same else because you've already asked. So let's make sure we get other people. I'll go to Mr. Rub now. We have a slot for a break right now, which is where we would have lunch. I think we'll probably go ahead, have this question, do that, and we have some more time later on.
Oh, we can talk afterwards too.
Yeah.
So my question is, when we talk about Ummah, you use the word Ummah, so which is above Republicans and Democrats and everything else.
Right.
So now you being in the Republican Strategy Committee, can you guys come about this here and come up with the issues for Ummah? Like we have a American Muslim Task Force for Civil Rights and Elections. Our saying is London.
Right.
They have 16 organizations. They have come up with an agenda of 10 issues for the community here. So what would be your support level for those 10 issues which have developed as a consensus among all these 16 organizations?
Sure.
Number one. Number two is, it was very clear in the last press conference in D.C. where Ahmad and all those guys were sitting, and you were there. And this thing came out very clearly that Muslims are not controlling the public discourse about the Muslims themselves. Someone else is doing it. So what are you going to do about it?
So two very good questions. So the first is the AMPCC has formed this AMT, I'm sorry. Dr. Ardasai has formed a list of issues. So first of all, I don't know what those are. So they so I need to learn what they are. So first thing is, people in government or outside government who are active in politics, we need to, as a community, articulate that. So that now we have over 100 plus Muslim staffers on Capitol Hill. The Jummah prayer on Capitol Hill, we have over 150 people. So when organizations like AMT have formulated that, they need to tell Keith and Andre and Muslim staffers, these are our priorities. That's the first thing. Then we can also look at that. Now, some of those things we may agree with, some